Hello and welcome to another episode of An Imperfect Leader, Leadership in After Action, a series where leaders look back at decisions they've made and consider a series of questions. I'm Peter Stiepelman, I'm your host, and I'm an imperfect leader. I spent more than 20 years teaching and leading, first in the Oakland Public Schools in Oakland, California, and then in the Midwest, Missouri to be exact, where I was a teacher and a principal and assistant superintendent and then the superintendent of the fourth largest district in the state. I'm constantly striving to learn from my experiences and from the experiences of other leaders. The aim of this podcast is to lift the learning and lift the imperfect leaders up. That way, when you hear the term imperfect, you'll see strength. Strength from the candor needed to recognize imperfection as a real advantage. Let's get started. Bryan Luizzi is my guest today. He makes a reference of Lord of the Rings, and I make one more right before the break. And for those who are Lord of the Rings fans, you're welcome. Those who are considering turning this off because it's just too nerdy to be associated with hobbits and orcs and elves and dwarves, well, you're in luck too, because the reference is almost unnoticeable, except for our cackling about it. And I promise I actually turn down the volume when that begins. Bryan talks about his experiences teaching leadership in Jordan. And he talks about a time after returning from Finland when some changes he enacted just didn't go as he had hoped. He does reference Finland's PISA score. PISA, for those who may not be familiar, is a global assessment for 15-year-olds in math, science, and reading. I do have some feelings about those countries that participate but don't test all of their 15-year-olds, just those who they've determined to be college-bound. But that's a whole nother podcast. But he does talk about going to Finland and learning a lot and bringing back ideas. And if you're an aspiring superintendent, or a board member, one of the things you have to be really careful about is the curse of the conference. Going to conferences is amazing. Going to conferences and declaring a whole host of new initiatives upon your return, well, that will be your downfall. And learning how to temper the enthusiasm of a board member who wants to try 4 new things that they saw at a conference, that takes real diplomacy skills, because otherwise they begin to associate you with the superintendent who just says no, or worse, doesn't take them seriously. Lots of juicy stuff in this episode. Today on An Imperfect Leader, Dr. Bryan Luizzi is my guest. Bryan's been the superintendent of the new Canaan Public Schools in New Canaan, Connecticut since 2014. Bryan began his teaching career at the Newtown High School as an English teacher. He also served as the manager of technology operations for Newtown Public Schools, and he then served in a number of administrative positions in the Brookfield school system, was principal of Brookfield High School for 5 years, then became the principal of New Canaan High School, and then the superintendent. Bryan, welcome to An Imperfect Leader.
Thank you, Peter. I am absolutely thrilled to be here with you on your podcast. I've admired you and your work as superintendent and school leader since the day we met at AASA, and I consider it a privilege to be here with you and to call you a friend and a colleague.
What's been fun about doing this podcast has been obviously being able to meet lots of leaders from all over the nation, as well as having these mini reunions with leaders that I've had the privilege to know for a number of years. For those who are listening, as Bryan just mentioned, he and I were in the same cohort at AASA's National Superintendent Certification Program. And this is what I think I remember. I remember that, yes, you were this really impressive superintendent, and then you were also working as a professor at the University of Connecticut, and you were teaching courses in school and district leadership, policy, climate and culture, curriculum development, design, and all of that was interesting to me for sure, but it was the opportunity to support principal development in the Middle East. I think it was in Jordan. That was really fascinating to me. And I wonder, would you tell us just a little bit about the work in Jordan, your role in that work, and maybe the ways that it's been rewarding for you?
It was all the way back in 2016, which, as you know, is BC, right before COVID. So it feels like 50 years ago, and I haven't thought about it or talked about it in a while. So I'm really thrilled that you asked that question. I had the great privilege of traveling to Jordan twice. It was 10 days for each trip. And while I was there, I taught approximately 40 principals about curriculum, instruction, assessment on one of the trips, and then school climate and culture on the second trip. Each day was about 8 hours long. My slides were translated into Arabic, and every session was live translated by 2 incredibly brilliant translators sitting in the back. And we all wore mics and had headsets on, and I heard their voices throughout the days. It was something that in my professional life, certainly nothing could have prepared me to be out there and to be doing this and experiencing it. As I stood up in the front of the room and looked out over these 40 or so Jordanian principals, some of who traveled for hours to be there every day, wearing that headset and talking into the mic. We learned together, we laughed together, lots of really great stories from that. And, it was, as for me as a youngish sort of somebody transitioning into the superintendency, it was equal parts, I think, humbling, thrilling, terrifying, and inspiring. For me, what did I learn? I mean, that's a whole nother podcast in and of itself. And you opened a can of worms here for me as I started thinking about Jordan again and reflecting on it. But I think, a couple of things were the inspiration that comes from learning with and from such committed and curious professionals. They care so deeply about the work. And it was really great to re-engage on that level, people that are eager and excited learners. It also was a really powerful reminder of how difficult it is to truly teach well. I really returned with a sense of awe for what happens in our classrooms and for what it takes to truly engage and be successful in teaching and learning in our classrooms. Our profession as educators is the most important profession on the planet, and literally co-creating the future in our classrooms. So this was a great reminder that everywhere in the world, from Connecticut to Missouri to Jordan, anywhere, schools provide transformational experiences for our students. And nothing can be more noble, challenging, or important for all of us. So it really was a life-altering experience in a variety.
It sounds like it. I had the opportunity to give a talk in Japan, where I was superintendent. We had a sister city in Western Japan, city of Hakusan. And I remember my translator said to me that if I continued to make jokes in my presentation, because I like to think that I was somewhat charming, she said, if you keep making jokes, I'm just going to tell them, he made a joke, please laugh. Because she's like, it's so hard to translate your jokes. So I imagined you giving this talk in Jordan, and just because I know you and the way that you disarm people is through just how gregarious and how incredibly sort of attentive you are to people and to the human side of people, that I imagine they're going, oh, here comes another one. So,
well, quick story. So the cultural translations are so challenging. So one of the things I did each time I went out there was bring swag from my district. So I brought New Canaan cups and mugs and shirts or whatever, brought them and gave them out to the students there as a gift and just as welcome. And they saw that we are the New Canaan Rams. And so I handed them out and they all started snickering a little bit and they were laughing. And so some of them came together and a couple of them had some broken English and they asked me, why Rams? Like, why New Canaan Rams? And I went into a long explanation about mascots and how they work to inspire and to energize and the positive role of sports and athletics in our communities. And they were still laughing. They said, yeah, but why Ram? And I said, why? Because Ram is strong. And they said, no, Dr. Bryan, we castrate our Rams. I thought, that didn't translate well.
Doesn't translate. I mean, those on such a simple level, you can see when you consider the fact that your community, my community, is in so many ways international communities, and just trying to navigate a very a new system. I just think about so many of our children around the nation who have had very different experiences, who may be refugees in our school districts, and we're trying to push very hard on curriculum when we need to also take that step back and recognize that cultural transition of acclimating to what is a very foreign system.
Absolutely. That's such a powerful and important point. Even when you think about what it takes for children to learn academic language when they come over, because they understand the word explain doesn't mean they understand it in the context of academia and what we're actually asking them to do and write and think. And it's really takes some time for all of us that are swimming in the water to take a step back and to understand what that challenge is like. While I was there, you just had to give it a try. And I certainly didn't do everything correctly all the time, but they knew I was trying, and that was enough.
Well, that's an important piece. When people know that your heart is there, then they provide incredible grace. In the leadership model I've been using to advise others, there's this dimension called nested patterns, which is really sort of the muscle of an organization. It speaks to how people behave. And inside that dimension is a term, creativity and courage. And I love how general that term is, because it could speak to an individual's pursuit of creativity. It could speak to the ability to be a risk taker. But when combined, it really describes an organization's ability to innovate. Innovation, after all, requires the ability to see something that others may not yet see, and it requires courage to actually to go for it. So when I look at your school district, there's this history of innovation. I mean, more than 50 years ago, your community, New Canaan, chose to invest in a planetarium instead of a swimming pool. And I wonder if you would tell us just a little bit about the role of innovation in your school district. And also, I mean, tell us a little bit about this planetarium.
Oh, I would love to. This is one of my favorite things to talk about, because I think that people in society do our educators and our schools a disservice when they equate public schools with traditional pedagogy and approaches. In my experience, I've found our schools to be incubators for amazing, creative, inspiring ideas. And as I've moved through different positions, I've made it my goal to sort of foster that type of innovation and to build upon it wherever we find it, wherever it grows. I've found the best superintendents, those that I respect the most, they know how to balance the responsibilities of stewardship with leadership. I think, as an example, I go back to the books I used to read as a child, and Lord of the Rings was certainly formative for me. And I think back about how the steward of Gondor oversees a realm that's slowly decaying, and it's decaying because of their commitment and adherence to the past, right? There's no action happening. They're looking backwards and they're trying to hold on to a past glory. And it's only with the return of the king or the leader where Gondor once again flourishes and grows and looks forward to a brighter future. They have to embrace uncertainty to do that, but it's only in embracing that potential of what's possible that we can truly realize the future that we want. We actually created a new position this year called our Director of Innovation, and we hired a dynamic, visionary educator into that role. She'd been with us for a while, and it was just a perfect step. So as an initial kind of foray into this, we've been transforming our libraries into design labs, into think spaces. So we're purposely creating spaces where students can collaborate, fabricate, iterate, and then create solutions to relevant problems that they're being posed. As an English teacher, when I used to put students together in groups, my first thing would be to ask them to put a plan together. So work together, build a plan. Let me see that plan, take a look. All right, maybe we'll tweak it a little bit. All right, go and implement your plan. And I felt pretty good, like I was doing things the right way. Turns out I wasn't necessarily. It wasn't the bad way, but a better way to do that would be to get students into groups and have them start wrestling with the problem. Don't ask them to sit together and create a plan, because what happens then is one or two ideas rule the day and they go down this path and that's that. Instead, let them experiment, let them iterate with whatever it is they're doing. And then the best rises to the top and everybody gets on board in building or working through that problem with that solution, and you get to the better place. And you asked me to mention the planetarium. Love to talk about the planetarium. We brought a team together to say, what is the potential of this space? We're transforming this space on the third floor of our high school into an interactive learning theater that provides collective immersive learning experiences for students of all ages. And if that's pretty cool. And I think that sounds fascinating and inspiring, but there's even more to it. And my favorite part of it is the technology today is so advanced that our students and staff won't just be there to consume other people's content, but they'll also have the tools to create their own content. So very early in my career, I heard a quote that said, good schools teach students to understand, great schools empower students to create. And that's what we're doing here. That's what we're looking at.
When I think about you talking about the fact that students will have the ability to show their own work, and I just have this image of a class coming in, sort of reclining in this sort of traditional planetarium seats, looking up at this dome and seeing student projects, whether it be taking their, being able to demonstrate their learning in a different way, but in such a creative and engaging way. I think those are the moments that students will never forget when they think about and they look back on their experiences in your schools. Do you remember we went to the planetarium, we were able to show the movies we made or the projects we created, or to me, it just seems so inspiring.
Although it's in the high school, The way that we are designed as a town, 3 of our 5 schools are within walking distance to it, and the other 2 are relatively close. So it's not only our high school kids, but we see our middle school, elementary students, everybody getting involved and really learning this. So when I think about 5, 7, 10 years from now, I believe our students will be creating content that surpasses anything that's available today.
Bryan, I ask this question of every guest who comes on the podcast, and I wonder if you'd give me your thoughts on this. How does the term an imperfect leader resonate with you?
It resonates deeply with me, not just as a superintendent, but as a father, as a spouse, in all areas of my life, as a husband. Chasing perfection is a fast track to disappointment and despair. The background on my laptop actually has a picture that my daughter drew for me once years ago. And it says, in all that we do, strive for excellence, not perfection. I love that when I saw the name of your podcast as an imperfect leader, I thought, gosh, it just sums it up in such a tight way. Because we should be striving for excellence. I do believe that. As educators, we have an enormous responsibility to do that. But perfection is impossible. And we've seen, all of us, how chasing perfection can result in people being frozen in place. If you're afraid you might be wrong, you won't take the risk of being right. Imperfection, I love that term. It's not flawed. I don't see it as weak. I think perfection itself frankly, is kind of boring when you think about, as that really should be your goal. I think the best way to be excellent is to continually challenge yourself, grow through experiences, kind of lead with yes, and see what comes. Because I think that we need to be confident in ourselves and those around us, and accept the journey that's before us.
Such valuable advice, almost as valuable as Mithril, but we'll see.
Well, now that's a whole other level.
An Imperfect Leader, Leadership in After Action is supported by ILAA, a firm dedicated to supporting aspiring new and established leaders. For more information, please find them at human-centeredleaders.com. We're back for segment 2 of An Imperfect Leader, called Imperfect Leadership in After Action. My guest today is Dr. Bryan Luizzi, the superintendent of the new Canaan Public Schools in New Canaan, Connecticut. And in this segment, we ask our guests to deconstruct a decision that they had to make, and then we discuss it a little bit. So, Bryan, what happened?
Great question. I have so many to choose from. So I thought that following along the themes of overseas trips, I would talk about what happened when I returned from a trip to Finland back in the mid-2000s when I was a high school principal. Finland had just performed very well on PISA. They were all the rage. Everybody wanted to learn from Finland and the Finland example. While we were there, we went to visit K-12 schools. We saw universities. We went and visited businesses. It was amazing. There's so many things to learn, an amazing trip. One of the trips, we went into a hypermedia lab where they were working on computer design and gaming. And they had their physicists, computer scientists, artists, musicians, everybody working together on a project. And it was really amazing to see that type of an approach. It seemed so different than what we were trying to do and teach students for, back home. And so I came back after the experience with lots and lots of great ideas. We started with a couple of maybe piece of low-hanging fruit. I convinced the English department not to grade homework, to just make it worth 1% instead of the 20% or 10%. And a few of them tried it and they reported that it worked. And we started to gain momentum about that. And people shifted to really minimizing the impact of homework on the overall grade. I thought, great, that's working pretty well. We did a few other things that, that were working, and decided the next move would be to shift our semesters and marking periods, instead of 9-week marking periods and 18-week semesters, into 3 6-week terms that then added up to the 18-week semester. Seemed to make sense. The math worked, and it seemed to be aligned with what we were encouraging people to do, which was to give feedback more frequently to kids and to families. So we went for it. Seemed like a great idea at the time. The teachers were a little skeptical, but I told them, don't change anything. Keep doing what you're doing, and you'll just be reporting the grades a little bit more often. I thought, hey, this is, if nothing else, I will get away from the 9-week Shakespeare units and try to tighten things up a little bit and really move along. They skeptically went into the year. I very excitedly went into the year, and it was a total disaster.
Oh, no. Okay, so what got overlooked?
The terms, because I told them don't change anything, they didn't. They took me at my word. So the terms were ending mid-units. Sometimes they were ending before they even had a larger summative assessment to use. So it all became sort of formative work that they were trying to work out and try to grade. As a result, the grades were all over the place. Kids that were typically, would perform at a certain level were up or down or everywhere else. The students didn't have a chance to correct mistakes or to make up missing work because those 6 weeks were so tight. By the time you're into it, you're almost done. The student athletes, they were suddenly ineligible in different times in different ways because their grades put them out of eligibility because they might have had a couple of Fs in there where they never had an F before because they didn't have a chance to take the test and to study for it or whatever. It was just a total disaster that rippled all throughout the system. And as I thought about it, it really, there's lots of mistakes I made along the way, but I really tried to bring about an adaptive change with a technical solution, as Ron Heifetz would tell us. And I didn't work at all on the hearts and minds. I just said, we're going to do, instead of 9 and 18, we're going to do 6 and 18. And the math worked, so it had to work, and it just didn't. And it took a lot of soul searching and reflection to sit across the table from some of the parents and kids and the staff and others as the year sort of unfolded to say, yeah, I didn't anticipate this, or I didn't anticipate that. But I will say this, it's probably one of the most formative and important parts of my career as a school leader. So I wouldn't recommend anyone do it because grading can be the third rail, as you know. It's a third rail for
That's
sure.
Right. Yeah. Deal. Ask any superintendent who has either now inherited or is embarking on standards reference grading, standards-based grading. I wonder if you wouldn't mind walking us a little bit back, and because I hadn't even thought about the student athlete piece about becoming eligible or ineligible rather quickly. I could also imagine that parents, as you were sitting across from them, that there was a sense of surprise that this was being done, and potentially without including them in that process. And so I wonder, what did you learn about relationships, or what new relationships were formed?
I learned so much about relationships in this experience. And I think that's one of the reasons why I say that in the long run, I'm glad it happened. Nobody was severely hurt throughout the process. We worked our way through it. But what I learned was to be real, to be my authentic self in those conversations. The empathy that I felt for the students, for parents, for the staff, for people going through a change that was of a magnitude that we didn't anticipate. I learned that I could have written up all the reasons why we did it and appealed to logic all day long. That wasn't what this was all about. This is about, hey, we made a change trying to make things better. It didn't do the things that we had anticipated that it would do, and did a few things that we didn't anticipate. And so we're going to figure this out together, and we're going to solve this problem. And, people rose to that. They came to me, we came together, and we figured it out. And we made sure that we didn't hurt our kids. We made sure that the staff figured out what they had to do. We worked through it all. And it was very humbling. It was important for me to have that experience too, because, when you go, I went to Finland, had these great ideas. Was fresh out of my doctoral program at Teachers College. I was a newly minted principal. I was so excited, and I still am, but gosh, it was like the world was all ahead of me and there's so many things to do. And it just taught me to think deeply about the importance of the work we're doing. We love to be innovative. We love to experiment. We love to try new things, but always do it with the folks around you, part of the discussion, the conversation, the decision, and the implementation. A good idea poorly implemented is a bad idea.
I really think in a lot of ways you sort of addressed the last 3 bullets, or at least 2 of them, in terms of what was frustrating. It seems as if you entered this new role with incredible enthusiasm, a sense of urgency, great possibilities, visiting a country that is known for its innovation and creativity, and bringing that back to your own new experience. And yet somewhat frustrating that it didn't occur to you, at least immediately, that you needed to make these decisions with people, not just for them. And then it seems like when you think back on what you could have done differently, it was, okay, so I was frustrated that this happened, yet what I could have done differently was really explore, similar to the example you gave earlier about when doing student work, instead of just telling them get together and come up with a plan, but rather allow some thinking, some group thought, the harvesting of the collective wisdom of those who are in a group to move together. And that in the end, that as you have now approached new challenges and opportunities, that you've sort of dug back into, or at least anchored yourself into this past experience as a way to push forward and know that you're not doing it alone. Does that sound somewhat accurate?
It does. And the lessons from that early experience for me have informed my practice ever since. For instance, in the pandemic, we were in a time of complete uncertainty and challenge. And that authentic voice, just telling the truth, putting it out there, and a call to action for people to work together to solve our problems together, really resonated for an awful lot of people. The experience at the high school there, where we went to the 6-week terms, the silver lining around it, or at least the positive outcome, was in the conversations with staff as we talked through what worked and what didn't and why. We put a team together that really then looked at the whole schedule, everything that we were doing, our use of time. Because another outcome of my time in Finland was the understanding that the United States is very different than most of the rest of the world. We measure teachers' time by the minutes they spend in front of children. We call that working, and anything else not working. And in Finland and other places, they're working when they're working together to improve that time that they are then with children. It's all the work. But we think the more teacher face time in a classroom with kids, that they're working harder the more minutes they have with children. So with that mindset shift, we came together as a group and created actually a new schedule for all kids K-12 that included some really valuable and important things, like 25 minutes of reading for every child every day. We put in an advisory. We put in collaborative work teams for teachers, where once every 4 days they would meet for 80 minutes and they taught similar classes. So it was a professional learning model before, early on, but it was all embedded in the day. So that's where we got, which was a really great place to be. We just had to sort of run through some other experiences first. And then, when they knew that I'd be honest about what happened and that I'd put it all on the table, it built a trust in a way that I don't think anything else could. That they trusted that, hey, Bryan's going to tell us the truth. He is, if it works, great. If it doesn't, he'll be upfront with us. And that's when I talk about bringing our authentic self to work, to all of our relationships. That's what I'm talking about. I'm not here trying to say or do what I think a superintendent should say or do. I'm here doing what I believe as an educator, as an educational leader, as Bryan Luizzi, to be the right thing. And that tone and that voice, that authenticity, I think is a really important lesson that we learn sometimes in tough ways through the experiences that we have.
Bryan, you continue to inspire me. And I know just hearing from you today will inspire others around the nation who are listening to this podcast and trying to just figure out how to tackle those complex issues associated with the superintendency. Engaging internal, external stakeholders, this experience that you went through in terms of really learning mostly, like, how do we use time and what do we want for children? How do we want to be together? Just looking for that common ground while maintaining one's moral focus. It's just so important. You clearly are approaching it and doing it. And so I just thank you so much for joining me.
It's absolutely been my pleasure. And thank you for the highlight of my day. And thank you for your ongoing contributions to our work, as hosting this podcast is such a gift for me when I get it in my inbox each week and I'm able to listen to it and hear from my colleagues and friends. And I'm learning so much from those who you're speaking with. So thank you for doing it. It's what we all should be doing, finding ways that we can continue to make positive contributions locally and broader. And I'm grateful. Thank you.
Music for An Imperfect Leader was written and arranged by Ian Varley. Sam Falbo created the Daruma doll butterfly artwork. Imperfect leadership is not a scarlet letter. It is a badge of honor. It recognizes that serving as a lead learner is about being a vulnerable leader, an empathetic leader, a compassionate leader. And I'm proud to be an imperfect leader, so I hope you'll join me next time for another episode of An Imperfect Leader. Leadership in After Action.